Well, the Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Jonathan Ashworth, joins me in the studio now. Morning. Just on that subject of junior doctors' pay, the government says it's a fair offer. They've listened to the pay review body. They're going with that. Isn't it time now for junior doctors to stop protesting and go back to work?
Well, I obviously don't want to see junior doctors striking, but I think ministers have to negotiate seriously with doctors. They can't just be dismissive of them in the way in which they have been this morning. Look, the NHS is in a desperate state after 13 years of the Conservatives. We've got waiting lists at the highest they've ever been in history. I mean, yesterday we've got ministers moving the goalposts on cancer targets. You know, when you've got cancer, you want treatment quickly. They've been missing all their targets on cancer. People are waiting longer. If you've got a child with a mental health condition, you're really worried about your teenage daughter or son. And they cannot get access. They simply cannot get access to mental health care. So we know that the NHS is in an absolutely disastrous state after 13 years of Conservative government. It's supposed to be NHS week this week for the Tories. They've come forward with no new ideas. They've been on the minister's been talking about new beds. They've actually cut 12,000 beds in the NHS over the last 13 years. So look, we don't want to see junior doctors striking, but the way to fix this is to engage in a serious negotiation with them.
Well, on that subject of health, as you say, the government is talking about changing cancer targets. The government says that its changes are after consultation with cancer charities and specialists who say that actually some of these targets don't really achieve anything, that they're a bit pointless. Let's just combine them all into three. It's about streamlining care and making cancer care better for people.
Well, I tell you who's not been achieving anything. It's the Conservatives in their running of the NHS, where we've missed all the cancer targets, or the main cancer targets. Those on a waiting list at record levels. Young people, sometimes in a very desperate state, denied access to mental health care. This is what happens when you run the NHS into the ground, and it's why, in many ways, it's all very well Rishi Sunak saying this is NHS week. He's not come forward with any serious plans or proposals to fix the problems in the NHS. And I think, you know, this really is a last-gasp government who've, after 13 years, have had their chance.
When we look at waiting list lengths, if you look at Labour-run Wales, the health waiting lists there are worse than they are in England.
But they're measured in a different way. And since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, the waiting lists in Wales have actually improved, and the waiting lists in England, where he's directly responsible, have got worse. But you know, another consequence of these terrible, terrible waiting lists in the NHS is that the numbers of people out of work, unable to work for reasons of sickness, is now at a record level. And we've just had this morning the unemployment figures. Unemployment has gone up today under the Conservatives, actually one of the fastest rates for some time. The numbers of people in work has gone down. We've got hundreds of thousands of people in their 50s who say they want to return to work if they could get the right help, but the government have failed to give them the help with reskilling and retraining. In fact, we've got ministers saying to them, get on your bike and deliver chicken tikka masalas. I mean, nothing wrong with working for Just Eat or Deliveroo, but it's a really complacent attitude when we can see that unemployment is increasing and many people in their 50s want help. They don't want to be left on the scrap heap.
We're also seeing, though, today that wages are also going up. I mean, do you welcome that?
Well, it's actually, in real terms, and since 2013, wages are still down on where they were.
But 7.8% up on this time last year.
But overall, wages have lost considerably their value over 13 years of Conservative government. The issue that we are concerned with at the moment, of course, is inflation. And how do you get inflation under control? And one of the ways in which you get inflation under control is to get more people into jobs. But unemployment has gone up today. There's lots of people in their 50s who have not got support. Young people out of work has risen again. And we know if you're out of work when you're young, that risks a life on the margins. So I think the government's attitude is complacent, and of course their mismanagement of the economy, particularly what they did last autumn, which means we're all paying more on our mortgages, families across the country paying hundreds, if not thousands of pounds more on their mortgages because of the Conservative ministers. This all suggests that the government have not got a grip of the issues facing the economy. That's why I say in the end that after 13 years, they've had their chance.
Let's just turn to migration. A lot of focus on that over the last week. You might not like what the government is doing with the Baby Stockholm barge, but every Labour politician that we've spoken to have admitted that you wouldn't close it if Labour were to get into government because you may need to still use it.
Well, I mean, the problem with that barge, hasn't it been a shambles? I mean, it's been chaos, hasn't it, this week? I think it was Immigration Week last week for the Conservatives. And then you had this one of the most senior and prominent Conservative politicians, Lee Anderson, came out and said the Conservatives have failed on immigration. That's his verdict.
Where else would you put these migrants?
Well, I mean, they had to take the asylum seekers out of that barge, didn't they, because of the problems with it. You've now got Priti Patel complaining about a proposal to put asylum seekers in a former, I think a former army base. Certainly a location in her constituency, complaining. Look, in the end, to deal with this, you've got to get a grip of the root problem, and the root problem is criminal gangs smuggling people across the Channel. Prosecutions of those criminal gangs has plummeted under the Conservatives. And these gangs have made millions and millions and millions in profits. Yet the Conservatives are doing nothing to go after these criminal gangs. So Labour would go after those gangs, would invest in a proper serious crime agency to really crack down on them. That's how you deal with this problem.
Another part of Labour's plan is to try and sort out new migrants' return agreements with the EU. It's been reported today that the EU has rejected Britain's attempts to create this new migrant returns agreement. It is one of the centrepieces of Keir Starmer's plans. What makes you think that Labour would be able to change the EU's mind if the current government can't on this?
Well, I think we would engage in a serious negotiation with the EU on this matter. But also, don't forget, we've got a serious plan to invest in a crime agency to work cross-border and go after these smuggling criminal gangs. The Conservatives do not have that plan. They refuse to do that. And I think when we go to negotiate with the EU, they'll see the seriousness of our proposals on that front, and that will help us get a better deal.
Do you think that's cutting through to voters, though? Because, you know, you've criticised the government for the way it's handled it, but a recent opinion poll by Redfield and Wilton found that while Keir Starmer is more trusted on 4 of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, the Prime Minister's own priorities, when it comes to small boats, Rishi Sunak's stance is the one that wins out with voters. Why do voters not trust Labour with immigration?
I'm not a pollster, so I'll leave it to the polling agencies to give their judgment on that.
But why do you think that you're not cutting through on immigration?
But I do know that the Conservatives have failed in immigration, because that's not my verdict. It's the verdict for Lee Anderson, one of the most senior and prominent Conservatives in the land.
But it seems to be the voters' verdict as well.
Well, look, we'll see. The voters' verdict will be delivered on General Election Day. And I want a general election sooner rather than later, because, as I say, after 13 years, this really is a last-gasp government who's had their chance.
Jonathan Ashworth, Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Thank you very much.